Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with Casey Curtis. Great to have you here, Casey. Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast.
Thank you, Steve.
With a veteran coach. He has a full head of hair, but he's been coaching a long time. We're going to get personal. How old are you?
I can't remember.
Can't remember.
I can't remember that.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Under 7-0.
Yes. Still under the big 7-0.
Under 7-0.
Hanging in there.
But this right here, a quote from Haddam McDaddy, Senior Vice President, High Performance Development, Tennis Canada. I'm fortunate to meet Haddam in years gone by. This reveals a little bit about age. It's a very impressive write-up. Casey has spent over 35 years developing and coaching some of Canada's best tennis players. The impact he has had on his students and his families have been significant and meaningful as he helped develop their character on and off the court and has helped coach so many champions. He's very caring, hardworking, committed, extremely knowledgeable, and loves what he is doing. This passion is contagious as he works to help his players be the best and reach their potential. Casey's also played an important, critical role in the historic success of Canadian tennis over the years. He helped develop Milos Raonic into a world-class player. Milos soared under Casey's guidance and ultimately made the finals of Wimbledon and achieved number 3 ATP World Singles ranking. One of Casey's greatest qualities is his vision and belief in his players. This is backed up with unwavering commitment to his players, attention to details, and exceptional understanding of technique and tactics that are best suited for his players. And I love this part. Lastly, Casey is a straight shooter. Now, we'll call it the way it is, and this honestly has helped earn the respect and appreciation of his peers, colleagues, and players. Thank you, Casey, for all your contributions, as Canadian tennis is grateful for all you have accomplished. Very impressive. Let me go to the beginning. Casey, were you named after Casey Stengel? Where did the name Casey come from? That's a cool name, Casey.
I don't think I ever asked. I'm not sure.
Casey, you don't meet many Caseys. Curtis is an Irish name?
Probably Casey at the bat.
Casey at the bat?
Yeah.
And Curtis is Irish name?
It's Irish. Yeah.
Tell us about your start in tennis. We usually start with what type of baby food did you eat? like when did you get in the game and your passion? Did you play other sports? Just your youth and your entry to tennis. How'd you get going with the game?
Right. Well, growing up in California, weather's great. Playing pretty much any sport was quite inexpensive when I was growing up. So pretty much played every sport: baseball, football, basketball, soccer, climbing on the monkey bars. Pretty much everything. And then played some tennis. My parents both played a little bit of tennis. My sisters and brother played tennis at a local club. So we did a little bit of that, but I didn't get real serious about it at that point. And we lived overseas for a couple of years, over in India actually. Played a little bit of tennis there, got on the grass a couple times. Came back to the East Coast of the States, Connecticut, New York. Started playing more there, and then we moved back to California when I was about 15, 16, and that's where I really kind of started to get more serious. So played quite a bit of junior tennis, and then attended a really good junior college called Kenyatta with the great coach Rich Anderson. Tremendous. He's guys in, I think, 4 Hall of Fames for tennis coaching. He coached Brad Stein, who I think you know.
Yeah.
He worked with a lot of great coaches, so I was very fortunate to spend a couple of years with him. Then took off and played what we used to call the satellites over in Europe for a couple of years. Came back, got injured, came back to Toronto, Canada, where I decided I was going to finish my university. Scholarship eligibility was up in the States, so that was part of the decision-making process there. We had some connections in Canada from when I was younger, and so I was quite comfortable in that Toronto area. So I ended up finishing 2 years there. Said I'll go back to California when I'm done with that, and I didn't come back to California. So now I'm back in Florida.
Back where the weather's warm. Let me come back to junior college. I want to talk to you about California to Canada. I think it was 4 years. It may have been 5, but anyway, for a significant number of seasons, I was the tournament director for the Junior College Nationals. And in one way, it was an empty title. Here in Florida, at one time, there was 32 men's teams. It went down to where there was 0. Now it's back up to 2. And there was really good tennis players. but the teams from California didn't play. That's where it was an empty title.
Right.
But the junior college circuit, I lived out in California. It was very impressive, the level of play.
It was, yeah. We had a lot of great players.
Well, it's pretty easy to remember in the 70s, and from California, there was many times over 70. It carried on into the 80s as well. So in the 1970s, over 70 of the players in the draw of Wimbledon 128 were from California.
Wow.
It was a tennis nation, tennis empire.
Yeah, California was big.
And also back then, all the courts were pretty much cement, correct?
Yes, a lot of serve and volley going on.
Even white cement, just serve and go.
Yeah. We didn't know the clay very well.
Yeah. With Brad Stein, I mean, my son was coached by him when he was. They were both with the USTA, and I know now he's Tommy Paul semifinals, Australian Open. Stein's close coaching him.
Yeah.
With so you're how many years? 40-some years in Toronto?
Right around 40. Yeah.
Wow.
In the 70s, late 70s.
We could talk so much. We did have a podcast with two people, Richard Hernandez, old coach, and Miran Mann, the young coach. We talked about Canadian tennis. With always in club coaching, always with juniors, or
Most of it, not always. There were a few years where I ventured away from juniors. Actually, was a little bit frustrated, to be honest with you, with some of the sort of the junior, let's call, attitudes. So I actually got away from it for about 5 years, maybe, and then got back into it after that.
with Canadians, I used to always say they have a superiority complex for hockey.
Right.
And at one point they had an inferiority complex that they just were compelled. They felt like they had to leave Canada.
Right.
And I think now that's a little bit different because it has
tennis players.
so much success.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for sure. It used to be almost a joke when someone else saw a Canadian player in the draws, whether it's the Eddie here or the Orange Bowl. They just kind of would look automatically to the next round to see who they're playing next. They don't do that anymore.
No, for sure. I remember Mike Belkin, watching him play. He was a great Canadian player from way back when. With what year was it when you went to York University when you got going in Toronto? Early 80s?
York, it was like 79, 80.
Yeah, I remember they had the Sunshine Cup and the Continental Cup.
That's right.
And they dropped that. I remember being at the tournament many, many times, and it was a version of now it's called the Billie Jean Cup, the old Fed Cup, and the Davis Cup.
Right.
And in 1989, when the Canadians, I think it was 89, we have to have our fact checker, it was Nestor and Janacek and a couple others.
LeBlanc, or Leroux, I think, right?
Yeah.
Leroux on that team?
Yeah, I think so.
Two Sebastians, I think.
Yeah. I'd have to check that. But when I saw that in the paper, I wasn't there to watch it that particular year, and I thought it was a misprint.
Yeah.
It's kind of like one of the Murrays, I can't remember, it was Andy or Jamie, one of them won the Orange Bowl at 12, and it said Scotland, and I thought, that must be misprint.
Right, yeah.
But I think the old adage that tennis players come from everywhere, but I do think that you have to go back to Nestor, what is he, a young teenager where he beat Edberg, and Edberg had the problems with his flights, and it was in Vancouver.
Yeah, he was 19. It was Davis Cup.
Yeah.
And I think Edberg had just got off the flight. So, but the problem with that theory is he almost beat, I can't remember the guy's name, but I think he was 15 in the world. Edberg was 1. And Daniel almost beat the other guy who was 15. I think that was a 5-setter. So it kind of verified that it wasn't just a fluke. Maybe Stefan had a little bit of an excuse, but Daniel was playing some great singles as well.
So it wasn't instant for the just using the first names Bianca and Felix and Dennis. What they accomplished in the 80s had a little bit to do with Canadians can step up and do this.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, Canada always had a lot of good doubles players, both men and women, really. And I used to get asked all the time, what's going on with Canada? Why the doubles players, not the singles? And I said, honestly, we pretty much always have 4 people on the court.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit of a joke, but I don't know, maybe.
No, I think with the weather and indoor tennis, it makes sense that down here in Florida, when the snowbirds come, like for example, they're going to go to the beach. You know, they come down for a week. It's like, we're going to the beach. If you live here, it's like you procrastinate and you never go to the beach. And I do think that a lot of times indoor tennis is just more structured. Okay, what are we going to do? It's going to be 32 weeks of winter or more, the Great White North, and we're going to be playing every Tuesday night at this time.
And it's expensive. It's expensive. I mean, the club I grew up in California, I think we had 25 courts, and at any time, any point in time, you would have 10 courts open. So there was never any issues getting on a court, playing singles all day long if you wanted to.
Yeah, it was Grant Connell from Vancouver and Glenn Michabata. Remember Louis Caillet was presenting all the time, young guy back in the day. I was young at the same time. We're roughly the same age, and I know Louis from the East Coast, but you know, all of a sudden he was coaching Grant Connell. Really, you know, as we could question that, not to hit Louis over the head, but that merchant of flesh, right? Well, did you really bring that kid up? Did you actually do the hard yards with that kid, or did you, because you're connected with the federation, all of a sudden you're coaching these kids that,
right?
You know, sometimes I'll call people a third base coach. You know, they're not taking the kid to first base to second base, but then there are some consultants, I call them, they coach the kid who's already scored. They've coached the kid who's already touched home.
Cherry pickers.
Yeah, that's what Wayne Bryan calls it, that a cherry picker. But you know, now, I mean, he with your time in Canada, you were there when the action method was in place then.
Right.
And then Louis, I know he moved away from that. Now he just specializes in doubles. But what was your thoughts on the federation at that time? Is it changed? What were your thoughts on the action method?
I don't know how much it's changed. It's always, unfortunately, been kind of us versus them. You know, the independent coaches up there all sort of already had their own methods, and I don't know how many of them bought into the action method. I just kind of was doing my own thing, just sort of the way I was trained and things that I thought would work well and motivate young people to work hard and become better tennis players. So in terms of the association, it's, well, you know, I mean, I think you're pretty familiar with it. It's a work in progress. It's always a work in progress. It's
a revolving door too. It's not like, you can't pinpoint one federation, but there's a turnover of people, of pros who work for a federation.
Right. Yeah, well, I think Canada recently has been pretty good at that. I don't think there's been a huge turnover. I mean, you know, there was some issues with certainly during COVID, you know, where the budget was strained a little bit, so they probably had to let a few people go. But I think that part of it's gotten a lot better, and I think one of the big changes in Canada was that when Michael Downey was hired, they upped the budget. They were able to do quite a bit of fundraising, and so they had more money to invest, mostly in traveling, you know, getting our best players out there and getting more experience on the road. So
I understand that Tennis Canada was set back, like so many organizations, with COVID, but I spent a lot of time in Europe. The Canadians used to send the kids twice a year. Take a group over in May, and then they come back, play nationals in, say, July, and then we'd be back over there towards the end of August. And the Americans, a lot of times, well, I don't want to go to Europe because I have to play all these U.S. tournaments so I can get into the Kalamazoo tournament, the 18s, 16s, 18s, get the girls in San Diego. With what about with Milos Raonic? I mean, obviously, someone who gets to the Wimbledon final, you can't get any bigger than that. But what about the hungry immigrant? I mean, don't you think that has a lot to do with the success of Canadians?
For sure. I mean, just look at their last names, right? I mean, a lot of European, a lot of Eastern European names, and there's two things I think that they have that. I mean, you see it more in the States. In Canada, not so much, other than hockey. But I mean, sport is big in the States. In the U.S., it's very big. You know, every sport basically. So, I don't think you have the same issues, but. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there, Steve.
That happens to me. It's called a
senior moment.
Senior moment.
Yeah, but yeah, I know we're talking about the work ethic. I think Eastern Europeans in general, have a real love for sport. maybe more like the Americans do. Canadians, again, it's mostly hockey, a little bit of swimming, maybe figure skating, but not so. It wasn't so much in tennis, and now obviously, there's whenever you get a few top players, it's going to spark the interest. We saw it in Sweden, you've seen it in Czech, you've seen it in the States. So now you're seeing it in Canada. Everybody wants to know what's going on in Canada. So I think, mostly the work ethic and then the love of sport.
I do think that Tennis Canada, I know Canadian coaches that, and I, again, feel like that the Federation, Tennis Canada, gets too much praise because of the success of, the current crop of players, a Bianca, Dennis, a Felix. With same thing right now, the Americans have done really well on the men's side, especially in Australia. Mm-hmm. And then, can the USDA or, do they flex their muscles and say, well, they're doing so well in U.S. tennis? But I think a lot of times it's competition, success breeds success. McDonald's goes on one corner and then Burger King goes on the next. Right. If you're looking to your left and you're looking to your right, I think that's where Nick was so successful, Nick Bollettieri. Yeah. When you bring people together, they feed off of each other.
Yeah, I think there's lots of credit to spread around. I think the associations are playing an important role. You can pick what kind of percentage credit you want to give them versus the independents versus the motivation from each other that you're referring to. So it's a tough call.
No, I think you're right to say everybody contributes, and you can't just pinpoint. There's so many stories behind the stories, the backstory of why someone is so successful.
I always like to ask the players, not necessarily the associations and not even the coaches. You and I both know there's, like we were talking earlier, cherry pickers. There's a lot of coaches that say, I did this and I did that, and I coach this player and I coach that player because it helps their career. If people buy into it, and so I guess you can understand them doing it. But I always like to talk to the players and just say, hey, who was your coach? Who's the one that's responsible for where you are? And they might, usually it's one, but sometimes they might say, well, two or three. My technique is this one. My mental side and my strategic side is this one. But usually it's just one or two. If they start rattling off 5 or 6, that's kind of unusual.
As an American from California, spent all these years in Canada, when you would have a player, and I know it's a case-by-case study, but when a player would go to work with a federation, what was the line of communication? Does that vary from
you mean from the player or from the association?
From the association to you.
Pretty slim. Pretty slim. To be honest, the approach was, we'll take it from here and we can do a better job. So that was the message. I'm not in Canada right now. I don't know if that's changed or not, but that was sort of the message. Obviously, I'm still talking to Milos when he's there, and he would come and see me when he's in Toronto every time. So we had lots of opportunities to talk. But in terms of other than Freddie Niemeyer, when Fred was with him, more sort of transitioning into the pro stuff, Fred and I would talk from time to time. Not every day, but we would talk from time to time.
With college tennis, obviously you developed so many players over the decades that have played college tennis here in the U.S. I think it's the same, don't you? That once a kid goes to college, you don't really have a line of communication. The junior coach is not really, the college coach isn't calling up and say, hey, what are your thoughts on the kid's backhand or the kid's ability to play patterns? And
it's, I think it's case by case. Some, you don't hear too much. Again, you just communicate with the player. The players that I've had that go on scholarships, they all stay in touch with me. We talk quite a bit. Not so much their coaches, but I have spoken with coaches. Sometimes they've reached out to me and asked me my opinion on something. Usually if you've spent several years with a player, you can share some background on a player.
I do think during the recruiting process, there's all sorts of communication But once the deal's signed, once they have their place on a team, a scholarship perhaps, but also too, people are so busy. It's like there's no connection with like there should be with film or with charts, and where it just the documented development. Where okay, this is where they are with the serve, and the way there's been so much research on the brain now. The way the brain works, as you know, it can be very dangerous to all of a sudden have a new coach.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
it's like
Yes.
there has to be that connection, and I think that's one thing we're trying to do with our pathway, our curriculum. Really think that kids under the age of 10, that's really where tennis teaching needs to be helped. I mean, how many times do you have someone? I know we get a chance to talk almost every weekend now with the tournament that we're at, the Battle of Boca, but with kids 15, 16 years old, and then they're thinking scholarship. It's like Wayne Bryan said about the USTA 10 and under program one time. He goes, "Yeah, I think it's great, but it should be for 6 and under."
Right.
They're just not starting early enough.
Right.
With, I do think that's art. I think it's much easier to be working with a beginner. It's okay, here are the basics, here's a ready position, here's a unit turn. But if you could comment on this, once you inherit a player, they come and knock on your door and they're 15, and I mean, their game might need just a little refinement, or it might be a total train wreck. Could you comment on that?
Sure. The thing that I'm more interested in, to be honest, when you're dealing with I've had fairly good successes with sort of redirecting technique and that type of thing. Sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge, but in general, I don't really usually have too much trouble with that. For me, it's more the mental side. When you're dealing with a young player, when a coach has been around and knows what they're doing and understands competition and what we go through as tennis players, you can help a young person a lot as they're getting older. So for me, that's more the value of working with the younger person, sort of 8, 9, 10, 11, like I was able to do with Milos and with Liam and Lane. When they're still young and they're learning. They're learning not just the technical side, but also the mental side. And if the mental side's not there, that's what I have found far more challenging in dealing with a 15 or 16, 17-year-old player. Quite often there's been, let's call it damage done from whatever, coaches, parents, friends, social media, whatever, that I think is much less likely to happen if you've been able to work with that young person from the get-go, from 8 years old or 9 years old.
You mentioned 2 other players. Could you give us their last names? Liam
Draxel
and
Lane Sleeth are 2 players. They're about the same age, actually. One in Lane's at Oklahoma. I think she's currently about 4 in the NC2A, and Liam's at Kentucky. Was as high as number 1 last year.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly where he's ranked right now. The team was in the finals, as was Lane's team. So both those players. Liam, I first met, I think he was 7 or 8 years old. His dad is also
Brian. I know
Coach
Brian. Yeah.
Brian. And Liam actually did an interview with a coach that he was doing a little bit of work with recently, where he said, Casey was my technical coach and my father was kind of my practical, fun kind of guy. Let's go out and play and relax and hit the ball. And he said that worked really well for him. Lane, both of those players, by the way, were kind of going back and forth, not so much training with Tennis Canada at the time, but traveling, on the tours and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, they've done very, very well, and I was able to work with both of them when they were younger, right up to a year or so ago. So,
and there was a time, or maybe it's still that way, where in your province in Ontario, that the older kids would go to Montreal and train, correct?
Yeah, usually around, they have 15, 16. They opened up the National Center in Toronto, which was supposed to be sort of a feeder into Montreal, so they had an under-14 program. When I was there, I think I'm not sure if they have an under-12 now or not. I think they may, under-12, 14 in Toronto, and then, if the kids sort of stay with the program, then they may transition up to Montreal, which is where they have the older kids.
So someone like Felix, who was in Quebec, he went down to Montreal all the time, where Dennis didn't go at all.
Right, Dennis chose not to go. Yeah, he took a different route.
And they customized the program for Bianca in Toronto, right?
Yeah, I don't think Bianca necessarily wanted to go to Montreal. I don't think she wanted to separate from her family for one thing, and so yeah, I don't know all the specifics, but I know they did set it up especially for her.
With coaching someone like Milos, remember Welby Van Horn saying that one thing that really helped him out with his career, and he was very successful developing junior tennis players. There was a 10-year period where he developed more national champions on a handful of courts in Puerto Rico than the state of Florida. Of course, the Puerto Rican kids could play the U.S. Nationals.
Right.
But Welby coach Charlie Passarella became number one. Mm-hmm. So that credibility factor. Actually, a side note with Joe Brandy is Charlie's cousin. And Joe Brandy was ranked 33 in the country in the 18, so it means he was a good tennis player.
Right.
And Passarella thought that Welby was being too hard on him. And the story is that Passarella's mother said, because Joe Brandy had polio. He one leg was shorter than the other and such, and the details for this. So the story was, well, if your cousin can play on one leg, you're not going to quit. You go back over. You take the grief, you take the criticism.
Stop your whining.
But my question to you is that from a credibility standpoint, and I always say I don't like credibility. Credibility means you're believable, not truthful. But it certainly must have helped you, or helps you to this day, to have coached someone like Milos. I mean, it's kind of instant credibility.
Yeah, especially again, depending on how long you spent with the player. But I mean, I spent 9 years with the guy.
Yeah, so it wasn't what do we say, an elevator ride. It wasn't a cup of coffee.
No, it was from the get-go. I think he'd played a total of, he had 2 weeks or something in some summer camp when he walked through the door. So he really hadn't had coaching, and so it was Milos and I for about 9 years after that, until he headed up to Montreal when he was about 17. You
can confirm this story. I don't really like to go with hearsay. I heard this, because that's certainly an opinion, but I was doing some things for Richard Hernandez at the Richmond Hill Country Club, and I suggested, I went up there, they set it up, it was great because my kids were playing ice hockey, so I went up there for 2 years. I've been there back and forth many times, but I was actually a resident.
I remember that, but I don't think we didn't meet back then.
No, but with Richard, my train of thought, another senior moment here.
You'd heard a story.
Oh yeah, thank you. So I came up with this idea. It never, like many of my ideas, it didn't work. But I said, let's have a corporate league, and it was Andrew Schneider, who was before a top Canadian before Milos.
Top 50.
My size, not a very big guy, top 50 in the world. And I remember he had a resume, and the cover of it was a photo of him, clinching his fist. He had just beaten Becker at the time. I think Becker was one in the world. Right. But you could tell me whether this is true or not. So I was told, because there's no connection between, like 20 years apart, Schneider and Raonic. But one of the Mayfair clubs, the father of Andrew Schneider would vacuum courts early in the morning so the kid could play before school. And then, but I was told that that's what Milos' father did at one time. He was vacuuming some courts so his kid could play early in the morning. Is that how the story goes?
I don't know about the vacuuming, but Duchamp certainly, if he felt the court needed to be vacuumed, he would. So it's quite possible. He might have, but they had been given a deal by Terry when he first came to me. He was 8, and as I said, he really hadn't played any. So I would give him private lessons, and then I said, "Look, get on the ball machine," because I had a pretty good group of kids. And I said, I think you have the ability. If you work hard, you can improve fairly quickly and join the sort of the lower rung of our academy. And so he did that. So he would come out on the machine at about 10 o'clock at night, and then again at 6 in the morning with his father, which at 8 or 9 years old is maybe not the best thing in the world, but he did it. And so it's certainly possible that he was vacuuming the courts, but no, I don't think he had to. I
just to the story just rang hungry dog hunts best. That they were up every morning. But you spent so many early mornings with him.
Yeah,
right?
that would have been the first 2 months. That sort of he came. I believe he came in sort of in September, October, and by January he had started hitting my group. So the stories with his dad and the ball machine were basically for about 2 or 3 months when he was 8 years old, and then he started joining the clinic. So we would do privates and then also clinic. So he was at that after he turned 9, which would have been in December. We were pretty much 6 hours a day together, a couple hours of privates and 4 hours in clinics.
The size certainly helped, but his serve. Actually, watching Ben Shelton throughout this fortnight, the Australian Open, it's almost, to me, it's like you can see a little bit of Raonic's serve in Shelton. Comment a little bit on his serve.
Milos's serve? So I knew his dad, and I had met his brother and his uncle. They were all tall, really tall. And so the sense was, okay, Milos probably going to be a pretty tall kid. He had big feet. Wasn't tall when he was younger. In fact, I think when he was 13 and under 14 nationals, I think he might have been the shortest kid there. So he really started growing kind of 15. But I kind of felt, looking at him as sort of as an athlete, that the serve was going to be very, very important. And I've always believed in the serve anyway. I think, you don't have to watch too many tennis matches to figure out how important it is. The thing that's always made me wonder what's going on is that everybody talks, oh yeah, the serve's the most important shot, and they hardly work on it. So I think maybe more and more coaches are starting to catch on, and maybe now they're spending 20 minutes a day instead of 5 or 10. But yeah, as you know, I mean, a lot of academies, a lot of coaches, they'll do it at the end of practice. Sort of, the coach will lean on the basket, and the kids will all line up and hit some serves. So, I mean, I've never believed in that. So we spent a lot of time. And I used to get asked by some of the other coaches once Milos started to get onto kind of the world scene with the juniors. I would get asked, why are you guys spending so much time on the serve? And a good friend, Luis Nascimento, who coached Gasto Elias, not sure if I said his last name correct, but Gasto was one of the top 2 or 3 juniors in the world. And Luis asked me, he said, Casey, you're spending an awful lot of time on that serve. And I said, I have a feeling this guy's not hitting 15 aces a match. He's probably not going to make it to the top of the ATP. And I think for the first 3, 4, 5 years, his average was 15 aces a match. That was just kind of lucky, but I always felt that. I just felt he's going to have a big serve.
One of his contemporaries, Jeremy Langer, somebody I spent a lot of time with.
Yes, great player.
Hits the ball really well, did well at Indiana.
Yeah.
If Langer's listening, if he had worked harder.
Oh, very talented, Jeremy, very talented. I said that into the mic, said it into the camera. Yeah, no, I like Jeremy, and I thought the guy's massive talent.
Yes, he was a kid who was small for a long time. There was another kid who just worked with me for a short period of time. We talked about him once, Nathaniel Gary.
Yes.
And he was huge at a young age. In the 14s, I've heard people say there's like a 5-year growth differentiation. Some 14-year-olds are shaving, and some 14-year-olds.
He was big. He was big. He beat Milos at 14 nationals one year, semis.
Yeah, played at Columbia.
Milos was up big. I think 6-1, 3-0, and then managed to lose the match. But Nathaniel was a good friend of Milos and arch rivals, and also Jeremy.
So that helped that he had competitive players like that.
Absolutely, those were 2 guys that for sure pushed Milos and so did Vazik. We knew Vazik, from Vancouver, and got along really well with Vazik. And his father's name is Milos, so we got along very well with those guys.
What's his last name?
Pospisil.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Pospisil. So we know they were out west working hard, so we thought, okay, we're going to have to outwork those guys.
So Pospisil, same age then?
They are the same age. Yeah. Actually, Vazik beat Milos under 12 nationals in the final. Close. I think
He's
a couple
for our listeners, he won Wimbledon doubles.
Yeah.
They, from Czechoslovakia, former Czechoslovakia.
Yes.
And then what happened after they defected, he has 2 older brothers, I believe.
Yeah.
And the story, you just...
I know one. I've met one. I don't think I met the second one.
But they went out to Vancouver, and he's on the hard courts. But then it worked out where he went back to Europe pretty much every summer. Just to hear the stories. But I forgot that he was the same age. Yeah, What people would say, that's a good crop. I mean,
Yeah.
one pushes the other.
Yeah. There's no question about it. And a good guy, Bazik.
I heard a story about Raonic I thought was so good, that he was over in Spain, and he was reprimanded by a coach because he's playing the Futures, $15,000 tournament, and he's banging aces. Mm-hmm. And the coach said, hey, you're not here to ace people off the court. Just spin your serve in and play points from the backcourt. Is that true?
Who's the coach?
I don't know. It was in Spain. It was a Spanish coach, I believe.
Well, it's certainly possible. I could hear a Spanish coach saying that, but
I don't think a lot of people think like that. It's like, no, just hit aces. But like, your serve is so good. At this level, work on your backcourt game.
Well, I did that in practice, not in tournaments.
Yeah.
Of course, in practice, the reason a lot of these guys with the big serves don't have great groundies is because also their junior career, they were so busy acing everybody, they didn't get to play. So they get to play sort of half the points of everybody else. So for sure in practice, I'll tell a big server just back off. You don't need to win. I think it was Roger Federer, wasn't it, that said nobody ever told me that practice was about winning?
Yeah, who said you had to win in practice?
Yeah,
now I say brawn versus brain. You get the big kid playing the little kid, and the little kid actually has better skills, but the big kid's just bullying them, just banging balls big, and they're getting nothing out of it.
Right. Exactly.
Especially when people, no matter, even here in Florida, where a lot of players migrate here, is if some boy gets to be 17, 18, it's better for the girls because the girls can practice with the boys, but if some kids gets to be 17, 18, they run out of people to practice with.
Yeah, that's why I think these tournaments here, the Battle of Boca, have been so good. So many top players coming in, especially during COVID. It gave the younger guys an opportunity to get on the court with some of these guys that are already out there, even ATP stuff, right? So
the Battle of Boca, for our listeners, it's every weekend tournament in Boca, the UTR tournament, really well run. I think that it reminds me of the 70s, because there's just like all these different players, different styles.
Yeah.
And back in the 70s, everybody was playing tennis, the tennis boom.
Yeah, no, it's true. I love it. It's fantastic, especially for the young guys.
Yeah, we talked about earlier, I wish it was 1 week on hard and 1 week on clay. That would be
right.
That would be better. With let's back up. Your better half had a chance to meet your wife. She's a figure skater?
She was a figure skater. Yeah, she didn't go professional. But when she was younger, her whole family was kind of figure skaters or hockey players. She grew up in Woodville, which is not far from Lindsay, in Ontario, north of Toronto. And so obviously lots of figure skating, lots of hockey there. Her mom used to run, I think, the biggest figure skating event in Ontario.
Yeah, when I was talking to her, for me, and this relates to tennis, when I have 3 older brothers that didn't have the opportunity to work with, was called power skaters, right. Power skating. Right. And a young hockey player, you're working with figure skaters, and they're wearing the wrong kind of skates. But I just, because of the criticism from 2 out of 3 older brothers, one was easygoing, and hey, you can't cross over going backwards this way. But they used to have the figures where they would draw the perfect 8, and the kid trace it, like they would look as graceful as a swan. And I was told that they took that out of the scoring, but they never took that out of the training. But growing up in ice hockey, I just was around figure skating. And I think the analogy, I mean, when you turn the TV on and you're watching someone hit these amazing shots, by the time they're at the end of the rainbow, they're there towards the pot of gold and they're playing pro tennis. I think we have to turn back and go, what did they do when they were younger? Did they do the slow motion work? And I was told that about Peter Korda, that one of our associates had a chance to watch him train. He was a little kid. He was just going slow and playing mini tennis. And sometimes kids are so little, they can't be banging the ball. They can't be muscling the ball. But yeah, I just think other sports, with all the Canadians that you coach, just about every kid you coach could skate.
I knew you'd get onto the hockey and the skating stuff. I don't know.
The reason I ask that is that I always say that a European kid, they can ski, skate, play soccer.
Yeah, I don't think so, to be honest. I don't know if Milos has ever been on skates.
I would think that years ago when you first...
probably has.
I think when you were probably first in Canada that... I think now people are playing just one sport. They specialize so early and they're not...
Well, that's not the advice of most of the experts, right? They say you should play a multitude of sports.
Yeah.
And then start to specialize, I think, girls around 11, 12 and guys around 12, 13. in general. But they recommend playing a lot of sports, and certainly a lot of the top guys did that. I mean, we know Rafa did.
Yeah, Ben Shelton, listened to an interview just today, went to regular school. He said, well, I just started playing when I was, really didn't get into it until I was 12 or 13. And he rattled off, I played 5 different sports. Granted, though, really born into tennis with his father's background and his mother's background. His brother, his uncle, the late Todd Witzkin, beat Jimmy Connors at the U.S. Open.
That's right.
And, but he was first on the Georgia Tech campus, where Brian won a national championship. But then now here, his son was part of it, where they won a national championship in Florida.
Right.
But I do think that there's just, I would think Canadians today, probably like here in the U.S., are specializing too early and not playing other sports when they're really young.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Which is best? Probably, again, it's probably specific, like individual specific.
Yeah.
I don't know, like a guy like Jimmy Connors. I don't think Jimmy Connors played a lot of other sports when he was younger.
Well, St. Louis, when I grew up, there was no soccer in the U.S. basically. A little bit St. Louis, a little bit in Boston. I know he played some soccer when he was a kid, but yeah, he'd be an example of somebody good, very young.
It's probably healthier. Mentally it might be a little healthier. Just not to have for that period of time. Maybe that's why we get burnout. When we get a lot of people get burning out. Maybe they started one sport too young. Maybe if they had been in other sports and then waited longer. I don't know, but
to learn to be a teammate too. But from reading this testimonial from Haddam McDaddy, it rings loud and clear that you deal with character from the get-go.
Yeah.
So you have to teach a kid when they're part of a tennis program. It's we have people sing the junior song, and we just have to say I, me, and start chanting it back and forth, and that's the junior song where they get a little bit too self-absorbed, too self-centered.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I am big on character. I'm big on sportsmanship. I think some of what's going on right now in the universities, I'm not necessarily pro all the screaming and yelling going across several courts, and I don't know if that's really great sportsmanship. I prefer a guy like Fed, or I appreciate Kyrgios's likability with some people, or in terms of kind of coming and watching a character, a guy who's very different from other players. I get that. I just hope he keeps in mind that he's a role model for younger people. I've never met Nick. I've heard he's the nicest guy off the court, super nice guy. I know some guys that do know him. They said he's a great guy off the court. But do the young people get to see that? Do they get to know that, or do they see the character on the court? So.
I was with someone this afternoon who was practicing with us, and he was visiting an academy here in Florida, and Kyrgios was there, and Kyrgios hit the ball around with this one kid and his brother for a couple hours or an hour and a half. They played mini tennis.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I've heard. I've heard nothing but good about him off the court.
Yeah, John Isner. Nick needs to just keep being Nick. I think with what kids are allowed to get away with. I find in tennis, older kids don't really regulate younger kids like they do in other sports, where the older kid tells the younger, they need to shut up, you can't act that way.
Yeah. And I don't really know what's going on at all the other academies. I know what goes on with my group and the guys I have. I have a 21-year-old, I have a 19-year-old guys, a 19-year-old girl, and they're definitely role models. I mean, they're fantastic sportsmen.
Yeah.
So they are setting an example for the younger kids that are around.
No, I think to break the cliques where, initially, you can get everybody to practice with everybody. Everybody can warm up easily. And, obviously you got to deal with player compatibility when you want to play competitive sets. But, I think that's where too many times where I tell young coaches I train, don't answer this question this way. But parents will ask me, who's going to be in my kid's group? And I go, that's a dumb question. You got another question?
Yeah.
Is this too much about who's going to be playing who?
Right, 100%. 100%. That's like, for me, that's like, see ya.
I do think, you spent so much time teaching indoors, being in Canada, that I understand where that's a factor, so your regular school, you have 2 hours after school. Who's going to be in the group? Is it going to be high intensity? Is it going to be productive? So it's definitely a different animal teaching indoors versus teaching outdoors.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe sometimes I take that question too, because I've obviously been asked the question as well, and it's I know you, I know who you are, I know what you've done. I'm not going to ask you that question because you would never have been as successful as you are if you're doing that. If you're putting players on a court they shouldn't be on, So go back and read who Steve Smith is, and maybe you'll have a better understanding. Don't ask me that question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
With so many things. I know we could have round two and just go through different parts of the game, like say just technique, tactics. I just want to ask you about Bob Brett and other people that have been associated with Tennis Canada. Late Bob Brett. What was your association with him? I mean, he's obviously came into Tennis Canada. He was under Downing when they raised so much money, right?
Right.
That was a very healthy period of Tennis Canada.
Yeah, so rest in peace, Bob. Great guy, loved tennis, like you and I. I mean, crazy, an icon in coaching. Everybody, knows who he was, knows what he did. And boy, that guy, he loved tennis. I spent not a whole lot of time talking to him, but enough that came across, his passion for the game, and was pretty much friendly with everybody that he met. We had one. There was a player, David Volson, who actually ended up going to Cornell, and I think he's in Florida now. I'm not positive, but he played some futures after. But David, I was working with David when he was about 11, 12, 13 in that range, and Bob was the under 12 national coach, which, to be honest, I couldn't quite figure out. I always thought Bob should have been spending his time with coaches rather than with players. I'd like to see. I would have liked to have seen Bob at Wimbledon with maybe 8 young Canadian coaches that are going to learn from him, rather than him spending his time with the under 12s. So, but we a few times we would get together. Bob would say, "Hey, Casey, I'm coming into town. I'm coming to Toronto. I want to work with David this weekend. Come on up and let's work together." So we did that a few times. That was about it.
I certainly was a disciple of Harry Hopman. He coached Ivan Nisevich and then Silic. Yep. I one time was at Indian Wells, and I had a young Austin Krajicek meeting with Raven Klaassen, just advice. And one thing that ended up is Raven was on the ATP board, and I know Austin did some things along the same lines, and just was telling him the advice he was getting. I think Eric Buterak was coaching Raven, and okay, what about life after tennis?
And you know a lot of people, huh?
Maybe the name dropping. It's just storytelling. But yeah,
you have great stories.
But with
I love it.
But the thing about going back to Bob Brett is, so we Indian Wells is a great place to hang around if you're a tennis junkie.
Yes.
I'll have some lunch. We'll sit here. We'll get some dinner, and so it was even Nisevich with Silic, and they were hitting balls all day. I mean, it was just, a lot of times at the beginning of the tournament, you can't get the practice courts, but the day was pretty much done by the time, we're just sitting there, and, everybody's left, and there's obviously the center courts and the night matches, but, just cross court, just over and over again, the reps.
Yeah.
And I think of that Bob Brett, I think of that. And I think that's gone away. I think that years ago, and I could ask you this, is that when you first started out, did you give mostly private lessons? Because I know years ago when I got into tennis, it was private lessons, and then kids would do baskets, and they would just hit cross courts. And I think that's gone away, where they're just kind of programmed out, and they don't really hit on their own.
Actually, I was just thinking, I haven't thought about it for a long time, but I don't know if you knew Wingfield Tennis Club in Toronto. That would be back in the late 70s. Just down the street from Mayfair, at Chesswood there. But no, we had clinics going there. We had junior clinics going there and privates. Doug Burke, who I think you know, was a player there. He came up from Jamaica. He was 16 years old. I used to hit with him almost every day. Became a great player, and then was head of Jamaican, both I think the Davis Cup and the Fed Cup for quite a while. Now he's working with Ace in Toronto. But we had clinics going on. We used to do the reps.
Yeah, I just remember that You know, a lot of times, like at Jimmy Everett, you go way back, it's private lessons, and you know, maybe it's like a group after school, but
Right.
there was no homeschooling years ago.
Right. No, it was, yeah. The one I'm talking about is definitely after school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that we're just going to get one ball and we're going to rally cross court and we're just not going to miss.
Yeah.
Or then you bring one person up to the net.
I tell the kids that all the time now. I don't think they believe me. I think they think I'm making this stuff up. You know, I think they think I walk through snow uphill both ways to the library every day. But I grew up with about 8 or 10 pretty good players there in Northern Cal, like especially sort of my high school years. And any one of us could hit 30 balls in a row, easy. You know, and to get players to do that now, I think part of the problem, honestly, I think they're seeing that a lot of the points are ending quickly. So they're thinking, okay, look, as long as I can slap 5 good shots or 3 good shots, that's all I need to do. But I keep reminding them that these guys that are doing that, if they need to, can do it 20 times or 25 times. Okay, it's not the errors. If the points were ending on unforced errors, it'd be different. But they're winners. They're hitting winners. But they can hit a winner. They could probably hit that winner 20 times. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, you know, I think you saw that with some of the rallies even today. I was watching Rublev and Djokovic. But they did have some long rallies, you know, 25-shot rallies, several. And these are great shots being hit. You know, this isn't 5 shots and out or 3 shots and out. It's not 1 and 1 or serve and 1. So yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it's completely missing. We do a lot of consistency type drills.
Of course, when you grew up, it was the era of the wooden racket.
Yes.
Date you and me. I mean,
Well, in the beginning, I did actually get to play with the aluminum and then
the graphite. But what about team tennis? Before college, you played high school tennis, and that was pretty stout, I bet.
high school. Yeah, it was good. You know, I don't know if you ever heard of Gunn High School in California, but we played against Gunn when I was at Carmel High School, and Gunn was a very famous school. Guys like Nick Saviano went there, Matt Mitchell went there, Chip Hooper went there. I mean, these guys were great players. That high school could have defeated almost any university. So yeah, high school tennis was great. Yeah, is that your question?
No, just that. I just think today is at Slap City. You know, obviously kids hit short.
Yeah.
You know, someone like Milos. You know, obviously, the key shot is that if it starts with a serve and you're on offense right away, but if you don't have a very good serve, you're, say, 12, 14 years old, you don't have a very good serve. Typically, in that type of match, the key shot is whoever hits short, and now people are not really playing the approach shot. They're just trying to hit a home run.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that's because they don't have a lot of confidence in their net game.
Yeah.
So it's actually not a stupid decision. If you don't have a net game or a decent overhead, you may as well take on some more risk with your approach shot if you're going to go in, right?
Right.
And to me, that just makes sense. But the obvious solution is to work on your volley and work on your net game more.
No, I think Braden said it so well. Where if you got to trust your volley and your overhead, you got to value the geometry of the court. 130 degrees, and then again, giving credit where credit's due. Bill Jacobson with stats. If you win 2 out of 3, it turns into 4 out of 6, 8 out of 12.
Yep.
People just through the highest levels of tennis, like last night, Tommy Paul and Ben Shelton, their success rate at the net was so high, so high. And a poker player is going to understand the math and go, okay, I'm going to win less at the net, but I'm going to come in more. And in the final analysis, I win more points.
Right. Yeah, it's all about the odds, right?
Yeah.
The odds.
We talked about touching upon tennis parents. I've heard you can't live with them. And if you're a junior coach, you can't live with them. You can't live without them.
Right.
What advice would you have for tennis parents?
Let the coach do their job. Let the parents do their job. In terms of, in raising a competitive tennis player, do your homework. Talk to as many people as you want. Talk to coaches. Talk to associations. Talk to other parents. I don't think there's too many coaches out there that don't have some people that don't like them. So you can always find someone that's going to say something negative about a coach. So obviously you have to, take everything into consideration. But I don't know. Maybe there may not be any negatives about you. I don't know. Are there? Have you ever heard one? I don't think I've heard one actually. But
Well, all sorts of critics, especially when it comes down to
but
technique.
honestly, Steve, this very well. There's a coach in Toronto. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's a very well-respected coach, and he might even be older than we are. But he said to me, I'd written an article, and a long time ago, 25 years ago, and I said, quite often the parents can be a contributor to the problem with a young player. And this guy came up to me at the turn, put his arm around me, he said, Casey, I read your article. He goes, really good, but you made one mistake. I said, what is it? He says, parents aren't a part of the problem, they are the problem. So I don't necessarily believe in that. It depends on the parents you're dealing with. But yeah, I mean, I would have to say more often than not, the parents aren't necessarily a positive contribution to most of the young players that I have seen. Not just my own players, but other players. And if you don't find this out until you talk to the players, and very often they're afraid to talk to their parents and really, come out. So I think it's not a bad idea for a coach. In fact, it's a great idea for a coach to meet with the parent and the kid and have a real honest, heartfelt discussion, because for sure we know that the parents want the best for their kids, and they think what they're doing is going to help the kid accomplish what it is they want to accomplish, but it's not. Quite often, it's not the case.
I know Toronto was really big at this one at one point. Maybe it still is. I've spent a lot of time in Toronto, bopping and shopping, going from one coach to the next, where they just, the parents are a little bit offended. I tell people, when you have a falling out with someone, many times that's based on they told you they wanted to go to this position with their tennis. They wanted to play high-level college tennis or beyond. And then you get into the knotty pines and you say, okay, this is what needs to be done. And it's like, well, I don't want to be pushed any further. And I think many times that's where there's a falling out. With, the helicopter parent, I'd say they're really the submarine parent. They're just taking them down, down, down. Every time they come to the rescue, they're trying to make their kid the survivor, but they make their kid the victim, and the victim becomes weaker.
Yeah, there was a cartoon not that long ago. It wasn't even necessarily relating to tennis. It was just, I think, teachers, and it was, I think, maybe let's say 1970s, and there was the teacher, / coach, and the parent like this to the child, and then it had today, and it had the child and the parent like this to the teacher or the coach.
Right. I've seen that.
So I think that's fairly accurate. Parents, for whatever reason, are instead of maybe helping their child learn how to deal with adversity and that type of thing, are actually making excuses and contributing and lots of that kind of thing. So yeah, it's pretty tough right now. And then we were talking earlier, and I mentioned that I think all this information that's available now on the internet has made some experts out of some parents, and they said, well, what about this, Steve? Don't you think you should be doing this? No, I really don't like it when a parent says that to me. Don't you think? It brings up one of my favorite expressions is, when I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. It's, what can you say? It's tough. It's tough right now with parents, right?
Then it's, the parents, many times one will cancel the other out. Where, we know that opposites attract. We talk quite a bit about personality and brain type. And one parent will get it. I always tell parents, if you're going to disagree with your spouse, do it when the kids are not in the room, because they're going to become the master manipulator. Mom thinks this and dad thinks this, and the conversation is going on with a kid in the middle. Have that conversation after the kid's gone to bed. And, it's healthy for people to disagree, but not necessarily disagree in front of the kid.
Right. Yeah, right. Usually my students know my opinion on things, because I give it to them. This is how I feel. This is, whether it's about playing a tournament, or whether it's about time off, or whether it's about how much training to do. the players know how I feel about things, so they don't really need. If a parent feels differently, or say, "Oh, well, can you please speak to my parent about that? Can you please let my dad know? Or can you please let my mom know?" Of course, I'm happy to do that, but at some point, I really think you have to sit. If there's a problem, you have to sit down with the student and the parent and say, "Look, we really need to discuss this," and the kid needs to tell the parent, "Yes, I'm feeling pressure. I'm feeling pressure from you. You say that you're not hard on me, but as soon as we get in the car, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? And you've heard it a million times, so have I."
Yeah, no, I think parents can hear that, say for the sake of math, it's a 60-minute lesson, and then within 6 seconds, maybe within 60 seconds, that the lesson's lost because they're not, say, what you work on today.
Right.
A lot of times, especially if it's a junior program, is who'd you play with, who's the score, what was the score, and asking all the wrong questions.
Yeah. Well, one of the favorites of the parents is, well, I'm spending this money, right? I'm spending all this money on it, so I have a right to participate, right? I'm sure you've heard that.
Yeah.
If you haven't, it's tell me your secret. But it's is that accurate? Is that correct? Because you're spending the money, you want to interfere and you want to cause problems and cause pressure.
Well, then also the point with the money, they're looking for a return on their investment, and it's not about, okay, is there a guarantee of getting a college scholarship, guarantee of playing pro tennis?
Right.
It's just a vehicle for life skills. And
yeah, and I can't think of a young player that I've had that wasn't already aware of the investment that their parents are making in their tennis, and unfortunately, from time to time, feel guilty a little bit about it, or if they don't perform, of course, it's adding pressure. And
yeah,
then you get that attitude, well, kids should be able to play under pressure. Well, yes and no. There's certain types of pressure that are different from others.
Well, you have so much experience. It's not everybody's going to conquer the challenge, quickly. Sometimes it takes people much longer, but they can get there. It's just not instant success. With Paul McDonald, old coach, like you and me, I remember him saying to me a long time ago, once you've coached a kid a long time, you can just tell story after story about that kid. Mm-hmm. And also, too, then with the parents, because typically, and hopefully, that there's 2 parents for every kid. So a junior coach, for simple math, if they've met 100 players, they've met 200 parents. Mm-hmm. Don't you think, for the most part, though, it's usually one parent that's the tennis parent, one parent who's really the one who's, just based on circumstance, they're driving, they're at the tournaments, it's not generally both. It's usually one who's more dominant.
Oh, yeah, definitely. One's more dominant, for sure. But I can think of a number of situations where they're both inputting, not always them being on the same page, but sometimes a little badgering from both, sometimes a lot from one and a little bit from another one, sometimes lots from one, nothing from the other one. But I would say, yeah, the one dominant, but I've had a number where there's 2.
Let me read this testimonial from Milos Raonic, and then you can comment about the story behind the story, his parenting. Casey, Coach Curtis helped me immensely to realize my potential. He laid the foundation for me as a player for early years of my career. He helped me through many formative challenges in a career. He went beyond being on the court to help me fulfill my dreams. On top of all this, he set the tone to help me mature and grow up quickly, which helped me on and off the court. Casey has incredible knowledge of the sport, but also he instills hard work and discipline. He's dedicated his life to tennis, and he invests himself and his time to help players to develop their game. He cares, and he will do anything to help you improve, and always tries his best to help you reach your potential. That's a great testimonial. What about his parents?
Well, there's an article about it. They were the first day when I met Milos and his dad, and I told his father, I said, look, I tend to work alone. I like to to have it be myself and the player that are working on this. And so he said, that's fantastic, Casey. He said, you'll be 100% in charge of his tennis. He goes, that's why we came here. I think it's also in the article that they had talked to some people, done their homework. And he said, I will take care of his education, make sure that is high level. And I said, that's fantastic. And I said, do me a favor. I'd like him to graduate when he's 16, because I felt that he was going to do very well, and I wanted to have those 2 years kind of between 16 and 18 in terms of transitioning out of juniors into pro. I wanted him to be free of school at that time. He graduated 30 days after he turned 16. But the parent, Jack was just talking to somebody about it this morning. He it didn't matter how bad he did. The only thing that Duchan really didn't like best, the mom wouldn't say too much. She was a nervous wreck. I used to say, you need a massage, because she was pretty nervous. But the only thing with Duchan that he would get upset at would be the behavior thing. If Milos would get off and start speaking a little Serbian on the side, that Duchan might get upset, but that was it. Whether he won or lost, didn't matter. It really didn't. And sometimes I would go to the tournaments in their car with the family, and he could play a poor match, lose it badly, get in the car, and they start talking about mathematics. Not a word about the match, not a word. So literally, they didn't say, Duchan's famous line is, I'm just a driver. And if anybody came up to talk to him about tennis, he would say, Casey Curtis is his coach, please go ask him or go talk to him. He said, I don't know anything about tennis. I think he still says it. Not true. I mean, obviously he knows.
When you're around it that long, you learn so much, right?
Yeah, he knows a lot about it, but just phenomenal.
But at one point, I was told, that he's on a recruiting trip to NC State, almost signed at Virginia. He did consider college, correct?
He did sign with Virginia.
At 16?
No. When he was 17, 18.
Okay.
He actually signed to go to Virginia, and then contacted them before and said, I've decided to turn pro, I'm not coming. And they said, fine. They said, Godspeed. So, he was looking at scholarships, but the deal that we had made was, when he was younger, was I said to his dad, look, for me, when a player is around 17, 18, of course, it can happen later. It's not limited to that. But if someone is 17 or 18 and they're competitive, they don't necessarily have to beat everybody. But if they're competitive with ATP 200, that's a pretty good sign that you've got a good shot at being a pro player. At 17, if you can beat a guy in the top 200, or you're in a third set tiebreak or something, and he was there, and that sort of, I think, played a bit of a role. But he started to do very well at 18, 17, 18. I mean, he played Fred Niemeyer, who we mentioned earlier. He played Freddie in a futures, and I think it was in Sherbrooke, or it might have been in Rapatni. Milos had just turned 16. Freddie was about 1-something in the world, was a very good player. And it was 7-6, 6-4 for Fred. And Milos aced him 16 times in that match. Fred came off the court shaking his head and said, wow, Casey, this guy's good. So he already knew, like at 16. They had him on the Davis Cup team when he was, I think, 16. First time.
What's an update on him? He's 32 years old now?
32, just turned the end of December, and last time we communicated, he was planning on coming back soon, like in the next couple months.
But he's been out a while.
When I say next couple months, he told me that, I think, sometime in December, and I think he was shooting for around February, March.
But he hasn't played in some time, right?
He hasn't played a long time.
What was the injury?
Leg, Achilles. It's always a leg, unfortunately. He's got long legs, very powerful. And then at one point, he dropped the weight on his toe. He was working out. That's in an article, so I can talk about it. It actually broke his toe.
How much time did he spend in Europe? When those formative years, so he worked with you, and then now he's.
You mean in Europe?
You really didn't work with him so much once he turned pro, right? He traveled, went over to Europe.
Once he kind of was really hitting it, like Australia, no, I didn't work with him after that. I worked with him. I mean, he'd won pro matches when I was still working with him. So, but he wasn't really.
Right.
top 100. He went to Spain, and then that's where he met Gallo. That's where he started to work a little bit with Gallo, and he was 18.
And then was he like so many players based in Monaco for tax purposes? And
He was around Monaco, yeah. But also he was working in other areas. He was playing, David Ferrer, I think, was very nice to him. Spanish guys are great, right? I mean, I think I like the Czech guys. There's so many great players there that they've all got their egos in check. I was 5, but that guy's 1, and that guy was 3, and right. So I mean, they all treated him very well. They liked the guy. I mean, he's a good kid. So,
but obviously that type of training on the red clay would help him. A guy wins so many free points, but then to put yourself on clay.
To be honest, he ended up being a better player on the clay than I thought he would. He kind of surprised me there. He really did.
David Ferrer one time was voted the most popular player among the pros. He was going to. I love the story. He was going to quit, and his grandfather and his father said, "Okay, but you got to do this for 2 weeks." And they had him. I guess he lasted 10 days pushing a wheelbarrow. And then he came back, and from that point forth, he was the hardest player in the world. I know Nadal said about Ferrer is he's the best player who's not won a Grand Slam.
That's got to be true.
I mean,
I used to call him the ATP Welcome Committee. Every time a new guy was coming up and kind of thought he was getting ready, David would sort of smack him back down again for a while.
Yeah, I remember when, the U.S. Davis Cup team hosted the event in Austin, and Ferrer came in and won 2 singles, and I think he was even part of the doubles, but he just it was a David Ferrer weekend.
Yeah, no, he was great. He was great.
With back to parenting, with advice for parents in the different stages, we touched upon where they play different sports. What do you think about parents getting out on the court, feeding balls, because it is expensive?
Yes.
That they take more of an active role.
Do you know Adam Baranowski?
By name, yeah.
So Adam was an outstanding player.
He actually coached Becker a little bit.
He did. He was Becker's favorite hitting partner.
Yeah, I actually made a video for him. Worked with him briefly. Adam Baranowski.
Super good guy. Works. I think he's in London at the Hunt Club, maybe. But the reason I bring him up, so I would have, let's say, Milos hit with him.
Yeah.
And Adam was a great player. Really, obviously knows the game extremely well, and was a coach. But if he's hitting with a player like Milos, not a word. Just drill. Not one word. And you know how hard that is for a coach, right? We always want to teach, right? We always want to help. So we see something like, ooh, I want to say something there. Not a word. If a parent can do that, fantastic. If a parent can feed the balls, repetition, let's go. No problem. Ball machine, load it up. That's Milos' dad did that. But can a parent stay quiet? Can a parent, is a parent going to say, "Hey, Steve, tell me what I should be looking for"? Nothing.
Well, they're the number one fan, and fan is short for fanatical. I know they get. Kid does get in the car, like you mentioned, and they're just the parents just start chirping and tell them everything they did wrong.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Draxel for sure. I mean, so it's again, it's probably situational. Should I say, "Hey, Brian, don't say anything to Liam"? No, right? I mean, Brian knows the game, and he also knows.
He plays the game well too. He competes well.
Very unbelievable.
Oh, he used to come hang out with us.
That's where Liam got it from. Trust me. But although Allison might say he got it from her, I don't know. Mom. So it has to be situational.
I think the tossing balls. We always say if you can feed breadcrumbs to a pigeon, you can toss tennis balls.
Yeah.
And like you just said, the reps. I'm glad to hear you say that. But also too, instead of getting into how to hit the ball, it's just like where.
Yeah.
Okay, I've learned to feed the ball. Like Richard Williams, I remember years ago. He's wearing street clothes, street shoes, and you could just tell instantly that he was not a tennis player. He did not hit a lot of balls, but he was feeding balls, and the kids just going side to side. And I think that as long as they don't start to pretend they're a technician.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking at one point. I think I had 3 coaches' children in my program. And these are 3 people that know the game very well. Maybe 4 actually. Never interfered. Casey's the coach. And these are people that know the game extremely well. So how many parents know the game as well as those guys? None that I know of, unless it's a tennis professional. So if they're not interfering and if they're not giving advice, it's probably not a bad idea for most parents not to be giving too much advice. And I'm sure, I don't know, have you experienced where a parent says the wrong thing? And I mean like on a grip or on a shot or on a swing, My least favorite is just get the ball in. I mean, you know how hard that is to overcome? Like, just get the ball back.
Or always hit it away from him.
It's the last thing I want to hear from a parent. Just be more consistent. No, I don't know about you. The hardest thing, I can teach anybody to hit a tennis ball on the court. That's not that difficult. The hardest thing is getting him to go for it. Having the nerve and the guts to hit a ball, when they hit the shot that they should be hitting when they should be hitting it. But if you have a parent in the background always saying, look, just get the ball back, don't miss, don't make mistakes. Why are you making so many mistakes? Well, maybe
that's
because Steve told me I should start going for my back and down the line a little bit more.
That's where we always say the little kid tennis and big kid tennis are two different sports. Kids can go a long ways with never forcing, never, like you said, have the guts to step up and hit it. And they're just...
You can also play matches where you make 0 unforced errors and lose every single point.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many things. So, two sides to every story. The term pusher, I don't really like to hear that word. You have to respect the defensive specialist. They played a pusher.
Counterpuncher. Well, I've said to the kids that I coach, I said, don't ever say that to me because you may as well just say that you're not too good.
Yeah.
Okay, because you shouldn't be losing to pushers, right?
Yeah, beat them at their own game first. I mean, be able to have...
Be good enough to beat them. If they truly are a pusher, be good enough to beat them. Or don't talk about it.
Yeah. But even in a practice, just stay back and beat them at their own game. Obviously, you want to have a complete game where you can play all over the court. But I do think just set up targets, and Dennis Vandermeer used to do this, is set up a cone and feed 10 balls. You get two kids that are out there feeding baskets to one another, and then mark down where the balls land, and they're so far away from the target.
Yeah.
And then anything that can be measured can be improved.
Yeah.
But I think that there are problems where you go to some tennis clubs and parents are spending lots of money, and the clubs don't want the parent to go on the court with a basket of balls.
Right. So I've always gone to, and I've had that situation as well, but I've always gone to the manager, whatever, head coach, whatever, and said, look, the parent's not coaching, okay? They're just feeding balls. And they've always said, and especially if they don't have a ball machine. I say, well, look, okay, if you don't want the parents on the court, then invest in some ball machines, because we've got a competitive program here, and these kids need reps. So what are they supposed to do? They can't, what are you going to say? They've got to take a tennis lesson with a coach, every hour that they want their kid to be practicing. It's not fair. So I don't have a problem with a parent feeding balls to a player as long as they don't say anything.
Well, we have this article that is on our website. Why do juniors switch coaches so often? And maybe the short answer is the pros do too. But, one bad coach is better than 10 different coaches. But I do think there is a side of it where there is a lot of incompetency. If someone's been training someone and parents do need to give a coach a healthy amount of time. You can't take 2 lessons and judge the coach on that. But if somebody's been at a place for a year taking tennis lessons, tennis training, and you don't see any development. But I think also too is that parents listen to other parents. I think that's a problem. I say loco, the Spanish word that means crazy. You go to a local tournament and local, and the parents go loco in English. That if you're going to talk to a parent, talk to someone who's been successful, because most parents they're taking their kid down the road for the first time, and and obviously they're highly. If they can afford tennis, Braden used to always say that socioeconomic functioning levels, that obviously the parents are intelligent unless they inherit it, unless they have a money tree in the backyard. And, they get to the point where they can overanalyze it and not let the path take its course. Let the kid learn from his mistakes and that, again, conscious neglect, take the back seat and know that, okay, this is not my position to have a speaking part.
Yeah, I think the point you made there a minute ago about the incompetence. You're referring to coaching. I'm
Yeah.
assuming, right? Yeah. So I have made that comment to parents, and I said, look, like I understand that maybe the previous coach that you had, you felt that it could be true or not true, but their sense of it, their perception is that the coach was not taking care of everything they needed to take care of. Maybe they weren't coming to tournaments, right? Which is an interesting topic. But because the reason I say that is because, most coaches don't charge when they go to tournaments, but you're obviously losing out on a lot of lesson revenue when you're sitting in a tournament 12 hours a day. And I think parents need to appreciate that a little bit more.
That's a very good point.
Which is obviously part of the reason some coaches don't go to tournaments, or they go to enough. We don't need to be at every tournament. I don't need to watch every one of my players play every one of their matches to know what's going on in those matches. But for sure, there are coaches that are, neglecting certain aspects of being. I've always said coach needs to also be a manager. It's not just about what you're doing on the court. It's also about managing the time off, And I've told parents this, that I basically want to be in charge of all this. The buck stops right there, and I'm going to tell you when they take a day off. I don't want a player or a parent saying, I want my kid to take 2 days off right now. When you start getting into that stuff, that's where you're kind of losing control of the situation, and it's not usually going to be very healthy. So I think the coach should be in charge of it. If a parent's not willing to allow a coach to do that, that's fine. But so it's the reason I brought that up, Steve, is it's kind of feeding in. It's just going around in a circle with some coaches, I know, because some coaches are getting fed up and they're going, forget it. Okay, I used to care a ton, but parents want to get more involved and parents want to do this. I'll just take the money and don't worry about it. Go ahead, say whatever you want. Take a day off. Go to France for 2 weeks. I don't care. Even though you're not going to achieve your goals that you're saying you want to achieve, I'm not going to hassle anymore. So there's a little bit of blame, but in terms of identifying, whether that's not the case, the parents are great and the coach is neglecting, then you can understand why a parent feels they need to fill in those gaps. And I will say to parents, I'm not that coach. I will take care of everything here. You can go and relax and enjoy your kids' tennis and not have to worry about it because I'm going to take care of everything.
How much more money would you have in the bank if you could charge people like a lawyer every time, the phone call, a meeting here, meeting there? No, to coach high-level juniors, high-level tennis players, the commitment is so much greater than just giving them the cash register lesson, from 8 to 9. Okay, you got a lesson and see ya.
You know this very well. I have many friends in tennis that chose the rec route, recreation route, and they are making significantly more money than high performance coaches. So if you want to make a lot of money in tennis, go the rec route in terms of coaching. High performance, it's a labor of love kind of thing. You know that, I know that. We stay up late at night. I'm constantly talking to people on the phone. I'm constantly watching videos. I'm constantly at tournaments. And then you're on the court. So I don't know how much sleep you get, but I don't get enough.
Yeah, I could do a little better in that department. Well, the relationship side too, I think. The chemistry. Tell us a little bit about, you want to have the coach. I love the point you made about being the manager. And I come back to the scheduling of matches. But how about support staff and assistant coaches? Over the years, have you had big staffs? I mean, you're probably a combination of a big staff, small staff. You've done it all.
Mostly fairly small. I've always have sort of a right-hand man kind of assistant who quite often I coach them. And then they're going to help me. I've had maybe 3 players like that over the last 20 years or so. And they're great. I mean, they're incredibly loyal, and they obviously know my method of coaching, and so I think they're quite good coaches. So I'm quite happy to have them start with a younger player, and then I'll maybe take over later on, or start to participate with them. But yeah, and then I mean, I take my coaching very seriously, and I take the students that are in my program very seriously, and parents entrusting those kids to you. I did one day say to my assistants, because I thought maybe they had. I mean, I have fairly high standards, so they're good. But if I feel they're slacking even a little bit, one day I did say to them, guys, let's just pretend today like it's our job to make these kids better tennis players, okay? But I've been actually quite lucky. I've had some great coaches working with me. I had one staff at one point. Janasek was on it, Rob Janasek. I had probably 5 guys that could be a head pro at any club in Canada, and they were working, as a team. So I've never worried. I think some coaches worry about, especially if they're still fairly young, worry about having, let's say, a really good coach under them because they worry about their job. So they'll actually hire people that maybe aren't quite as good, so they're never in any danger of losing their position. I don't think that should ever be the case, but sometimes it is. So I've been really, really fortunate in having great assistants.
I know Tennis Canada, again, to go with the positives, I think there's so many positives. And I think too many times the federations here in the USTA, I think the USTA gets beat up, and obviously they do a lot of things really well.
Yeah, apparently.
But with, just the management side of it, one thing coming back to Tennis Canada is that old coach, young coach, they did that for a while. Miron Mann had a chance to travel as a young coach. And I think that's a good mix. If you have old coach, young coach, because sometimes the player will be a little more comfortable or communicate a little better with a younger coach. That's not always the case, but let me ask you, I know I said a few things to you that you chuckled at. ITF's idiots traveling foolishly.
I like to have fun.
I like to have fun.
ITF.
Yeah, I think that's one positive of the UTR is that there's some certainly negatives of the UTR, like anything. There's two sides of the coin, but some kid is in Barbados, they're in Costa Rica, they're in Guam, they're wherever, and they're playing an ITF tournament. And say just on the boys, I mean, the kids are 9.8, they're 10.2s, and it's the level is not very high. What would your comment on tournaments and managing? You mentioned that.
So I actually wrote an article, it's on my website, about tournament play. And basically, in my opinion, pretty much every association and most coaches are saying, you have to play a massive number of tournaments as a tennis player. That has not been my experience. 50 some odd years of watching tournament play, playing the game myself, and coaching players. I basically broke it down into 3 categories of athletes. One are the ice in the veins kind of athletes, who just, no matter what they're doing, they just know how to compete. They're competitive. They are able to separate everything else in their life from their competition. So they walk in that gate, it's all about that match, and that's it. They're not thinking about you. They're not thinking about mom and dad. They're not thinking about points. They just play in the match straight ahead. That's a very small percentage, around 20, I think, at the most. Then I said there's about the largest percentage, about 55%. They need 3 to 5 experiences at each level. So as they're climbing up the ladder, you start off with an entry-level tournament. I think they call them L7s here. Is that right?
Yeah.
In the U.S. So we have rookie tournaments, so where basically nobody's played these tournaments. They've never played a tournament before, so they go in there. So they're going to be nervous. It's their first tournament. They could be 8 years old, they could be 10, but it's their first tournament ever. They're probably a bit nervous. And they play their second one, they're not so nervous. They play the third one, they're less nervous. 4 or 5, it's old hat. Now they go up to the next level. In Canada, we call them 2, 3 star. Down here, it's, let's say, L5. So as you're climbing the ladder, what I have observed is the majority of athletes, they get used to each level, and then they go up to the next level. And they get used to that level, they go up to the next level. Then you go into international stuff, you get into the Eddie Hare. First time you go to Eddie Hare with the flags, it looks like the Olympics. Everybody's a little nervous, right? If somebody's played 2 or 3 of those things, they're like professionals. It's no big deal. Orange Bowl, same thing. And you go pro. So at each level. And then there's about 30% that I don't care how many tournaments they play, they're still choking when they're 18 like they were when they were 12, and even at the same junction. They need some assistance. You can call it. I don't think it needs to be a sports psychologist because I don't think it's sport related. I think it's psychology. I think there's something going on, whether it's a fear of failure, fear of success, stage fright, whatever. But they need some assistance. They need to talk to someone who can help them through that. A professional. I know some tennis coaches that are pretty good at it. But in general, I would say you should probably speak to some kind of professional, either sports psychologist or psychologist.
Oh, that's well put. So the first group, ice in the veins.
Yeah, Tennis Shapovalov.
Okay.
He had it. I'm not sure what's going on. I think he still got it. I think he's struggling a little bit right now. But that kid, just go for it. He just would go for it, just no fear.
Yeah, at court 19, Richmond Hill. There's a video, 8 years old, where he's going forward at 8.
Yeah.
I know Miron Man was a hitting partner. We had a player who was struggling, and he was upset with the coach. And I said, "No, the coach got emotional, and you should, just take the coach's grief. Coaches, we make mistakes all the time." And so, with this player, and I had another player sit in on it. We called up Richard Hernandez and Miron Man and say, just tell us what Shapovalov was like at each stage, because he was at the facility for 10 years. And, Richard said, you could just tell when he put his headband on, he was just ready to go. He might be 8 years old. And then he also said, Miron took him to I don't know, they call it selections or some type of group setting. And, there might have been 24 kids and he was like number 20. Yeah. But it didn't faze him. He was just there to compete.
Yeah, obviously I didn't know that story, but it doesn't surprise me. Somebody say, hey, Case, guess what? I know Dennis a little bit, but not enough to confirm what I said, other than what I've seen when I watch him compete. And you can kind of tell somebody's running and gunning when they're at 5-6 in a tiebreak, third set tiebreak.
No, I loved what you said about the players who choke. Is that it's not necessarily a sport or a tennis issue. It's just
it's not related to sport. I don't think. It's if they're going to go take a test at school, they're scared to death. Go to take their driver's license, they're scared to death. And somebody else is going to just sit over there, buddy. I'm going to show you how to drive. Da, 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 boom. It's tennis.
Yeah. So you have names, ice in the vein. There's the third group is chokers. What's the middle group called?
I don't call them chokers. They're just nervous people.
Nervous people.
Yeah, the middle group. No, I don't have a name for it.
There's a category. It's interesting though.
It's just, but that's I kind of tinkered a little bit with the percentages, and
so I misunderstood when you said ice in the veins. I thought that was like a name, but that's just an expression.
No, I said they have ice in their veins.
They have ice in their veins. Yeah, okay.
That's how I describe.
No, that's great. This is something I tell parents. You take Hingis, Davenport, and Venus Williams. They're all about the same age. Mm-hmm. Different paths up the mountain. Where Hingis won Junior Wimbledon at 12. Mm-hmm. Where Davenport pretty much did all the USTA and regular high school. And of course, Venus, she stopped playing tournaments after the age of 10. Mm-hmm. But they were hitting balls. They were living their life to win. They were following the pathway that you've offered for players for decades now. Yeah,
I had two boys, twins that I trained in Toronto, and I started with them at about 8, Hungarian brothers, and did not play a tournament until they were 13, and played matches. Like I said in that article, don't get me wrong, you need lots of match play. But you don't need tournaments to learn how to play. Tournaments don't teach you strategy. They teach you how to deal with your mind, right? You learn strategy when you're playing matches. You don't have to be in a tournament. What does a tournament have to do with strategy? If you're playing a practice match, it's the same thing. So these guys went into their first tournament, and the lefty, Eric, won the tournament, and the righty made the semis. Actually, the lefty won his first 3 tournaments, I think. And there were guys that were like top 5 in the country in the tournament, guys who had massive experience already. So what happened to that theory about how you need massive amounts of tournament play? You don't. You need massive amount of matches, but the tournaments are about that.
I like to tell people every day is a tournament.
Yeah.
Just live your life like it's a tournament. Yeah, you need a break, you need a rest, but
Well, you know who said that was Borg, right? His famous quote. I play every point in practice like it's match point at Wimbledon. That was his famous quote. I love it, right? Because in the beginning, I think like most coaches, when I first started coaching, I would say to players, I would say, okay, look, Steve, you're going into a tournament, just pretend like it's practice. That doesn't work because Steve's not stupid. Steve knows it's not practice. Steve knows it's a tournament. Guys go in the final Wimbledon, what are you going to say? Just relax and pretend it's practice? No, there's like, what, 20 million on the line? I got how many millions of people watching? So it didn't take me too long to realize I got to flip that, and I got to start making practice like matches as much as I can. I got to figure out a way. I don't let my kids bet, but that would be one way if they actually had their own money. And how do you put the kind of pressure that players feel in a tournament on a player in practice?
well, years ago, kids would bet. They play for a racket. They're all using Jack Kramer's way back when, or
Jack Kramer.
$5 sets. Play for something.
Right.
With that certainly can be troublesome, but no, it's really interesting with getting people to be able to compete. Welby Van Horn used to just you start talking tennis with someone and you say, how does someone develop the mindset to be able to compete? And
you know what Rod Laver said about it? He said choking is simply an inability to concentrate correctly. He's 100% right. Before you can choke, before you can get nervous, you're thinking something. It's the wrong thing to be thinking.
I think that's where it's great to go back to previous champions. That's where I know you do as well. I love to listen to the commentators. Now, a lot of times when they start talking about forehands and backhands, they're way off. But they've been around the game, and like Jimmy Connors. He was so fortunate to spend so much time around the two Panchos, Gonzalez, Seguro, and then Bobby Riggs. Greatest thing in life is to play tennis and win. Second greatest thing in life is to play tennis and lose.
I thought that was Jimmy that said that.
No, he did, but where does that come from?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Or like with Borg, I just think that you're parenting or parents, the coaches or the coach. They don't necessarily have to be a tennis player, but I do think if parents were to relate their everyday, like, well, how did you become a doctor? How did you become a lawyer? How did you become successful? How's your business world working? Yeah. And it's the same as tennis. So they get up every day, got to go to work, and they got to problem solve.
And you just tell them you'll be in tomorrow to help them.
Yeah.
Right? Steve, you ever done that?
Yeah, for sure. Tell us.
Hey, Doc, I'm going to come and help you with surgery.
Oh, I missed it. I missed the point. No, okay.
I'm going to come and help you with that surgery tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think with tennis, it comes through the phone, it comes through the mail, it comes through the TV, and you go to a cocktail party. I mean, whatever. People, they want to talk about tennis. The physician's not talking about the surgery.
Right.
Tennis, let's talk tennis. And then people think they have a higher level of knowledge than they actually do.
Right. And that's, I've run into that issue. I mean, I'm a pretty nice guy, and I always want to, of course, sort of help the parents understand the game. Let's say I don't think they understand it very well. And so I'll explain it thinking, okay, they're going to enjoy watching their child more by having a little better knowledge of the game and what's going on and all that. But then the next thing you know, that parent's telling me stuff. They're telling me, I think Johnny should do this, I think, do you want me to talk to him during the second and third set on when you can coach? Do you want me to take over?
One of the best speakers in tennis, I think, is Vijay Armitage. And, many marriages in the Indian culture are prearranged. Mm-hmm. So his wife knew nothing about tennis. And he tells the story of, okay, there's a courtship, we get married, and boom, 3-4 months into it, she's saying, "You're not hitting your backhand very well." With pretty funny how he tells that story. I want to bring this up before I forget. You've mentioned some articles. How do people find you on the internet? What's your website?
It's Curtis Tennis. It's my last name. CURTIS tennis.com.
Curtis.
Or just Curtis Tennis.
CurtisTennis.com.
Yeah, .com.
With
or you can Google. You can just Google the name. It'll come up.
Yeah. No, let's go over a few other points with. And again, we could come back. We see each other quite often. We could come back and talk.
That's fun.
I mentioned technique or tactics, but with parenting, with the expensive tennis.
Yes.
Okay, you have to, perhaps join a club, especially, you spent all those years in Canada, the indoor court costs. What about the beginning parent? I mean, you've spent so much time with competitive players, the people that are first getting into it. We have a course, it's called Practice at Home. And I do think that people will go to the internet and, they're going to put in a deck, they're going to build a patio. I've heard people say you can learn to do anything on the internet. And I go, yeah, anything but tennis. Because, there's a new website every day, basically. What are your thoughts for the beginning parent?
I always say the same thing. Number one, make sure your kid's having fun. We're talking 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Make sure your kid's having fun. Make sure they develop a love of the sport. Don't take it too seriously. Don't blow your brains out spending too much money. Make sure you're getting good coaching. But it's not that, as you know, it's not that difficult. The truth is, if you watch most lessons, it's like private lessons. How much of it is actually passing on information to a student, like 10 minutes? If you put a stopwatch when a coach is talking, when they're showing a player something and then you hit it, I don't think you'll have more than 10 minutes, and the rest of it is repetition. So it's really not that difficult. The child needs to learn whatever that coach's concept of the technique is. We're not all the same. We all have our sort of little differences in how we want to teach the technique, but I would say make sure spend enough money that you have a good coach. Like I would probably recommend 30-minute lesson. Like with figure skaters, you brought up my wife. You know how long their lessons are? 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
Yeah, we do hour lessons because everything's on the hour. Like especially in indoor stuff. I feel very confident that I could give 15-minute lessons and get a lot done. And to just make sure the player understands. And I'm huge on shadowing. I'm very big on shadowing swings. I do believe that there is a better way to hit a tennis ball. Most coaches will say, well, look, there's all different types of ways. Obviously there is, because we can see it with the professionals. But mechanically, there's still certain things that have to happen with the racket, and I think there's better ways to get it done. Again, we can talk about that. Just make sure that you're with a reputable coach, because there are still some coaches out there that aren't necessarily teaching the best technique, no matter what their theory is. We all know kind of the main different types of theories on hitting a forehand or hitting a backhand, hitting a serve, volley, whatever. There's differences, but they're not. They're different, but they're not crazy different.
Well, Van Horn used to say that very often the most inexpensive lesson is the most expensive, because the bargain. The people looking for the discount, the bargain hunters. That you're right, to find somebody who really knows what they're doing. But I do think that the parents. Mary Pierce, Jim Pierce, had some problems with dealing with, behavior and such. But, at the same time, there's some positives, because look how great his kid did. So, but I just think that, then the microscope is too much on the negative. He was labeled the tennis parent from hell, and I'm sure he did a lot of great things, but there's a couple times where he just lost school, or maybe more than a couple times, and a lot of people know the story, or at least like me, just know parts of the story from the outside. But I do think that parents many times they don't want to be proactive. They just drop their kid off, and they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, that's been a complaint of mine for a long time, especially when I hear them comparing prices. So they're going to bring their kid to Steve Smith for a half an hour for one rate, or a clinic rate. But look, Steve, it's like 20% cheaper over here with these 16-year-old high school students that have never played the game. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Where's
the value? Like make sure you check out the value, not just the price. I assume that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It really is kind of crazy. I'd say most parents, I used to say this a lot in Toronto, most parents, especially summer camps, I think they as long as their kids are safe and having fun, That's what they really care about. And I mean, I guess there's nothing really wrong with that unless you actually want your kid to learn how to play the game.
Yeah, live and let live.
Yeah.
But I think what happens with so many young kids is that, just to pick a number out of the sky, 5 years goes by, and you just, to go backwards and work against what they were doing. It's like for five years of bad tennis, 5 years of bad myelin.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa.
Yeah, I can't. Again, I'm sure you're probably similar, but I go crazy if my players aren't improving. I totally feel it's my issue, something I've got to work on. So something I've got to figure out. I've got to change tack or something. If the athlete is working.
Now, in pro tennis, it's a different animal, but in junior tennis, if your player beats a player, and then down the road, 6 months later, they lose to the player, I think that's where the coach has to step up and go, okay, I'm in on this too. The coach wins or loses too. I think many times a junior player, when they go out, they don't realize, hey, I lost, but the coach lost too. If the coach is working with me, I should be able to figure out how to win some matches. Yeah. Just like it is at the highest levels of sport.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's end this thing. It's been great to have you on. We'd love to have you on again. Having fun. We're drinking water. We could have a Canadian beer, a low to high swallow through. I think if you're having that much fun now, when we started, everyone, I said, let's test some mics, Casey. And I think he's going to get a little stage fright. We're going to ask him right now if he wants to just bellow a little Elvis. No Elvis. You're going to pass?
I'm going to work on it. I'm going to practice.
Next time
we'll do that. I promise you.
You promise. Okay.
I'm going to go work on it.
We'll definitely have to do this next time. I mean, I'm an Elvis fan. Mentioned on a podcast earlier that I remember my brother at 77. He walked quite a ways to tell me I was just hitting a tennis backboard. He just walked up and said Elvis died. Jimmy Connors, and our listeners, is that Casey was doing a great job with sounding like Elvis, the King.
We were doing the mic check.
And with, but yeah, we'll have to get you on another time to sing. I think, what other topics? We can talk about strokes. We can talk about technique.
I think the mental side is really important. It's a growing field for sure, and I've spoken to a number of people that are kind of getting involved in that area.
Yeah.
And there's just so much, and I think for me it's not totally unlike coaches or personal trainers. Getting a great personal trainer. Fitness is such a huge part of our sport. I think the management side, the nutritional side, the sleeping side, because with social media, we all know that kids are, I'm going to sleep now, and they're in their room with their Snapchats and everything else that's going on in their lives. So,
no, I think that's the total package coach. You have to cover it all. Before we started, listeners, we walked through the FM Performance Center. Brandon Flanagan has put together with his team, with his partner Allington. Nicole Erickson, we had a podcast with her. I was telling, she's a mental performance coach, and I was suggesting, maybe you could do it with PinPal, because it's expensive, and everything's expensive. It's like, the parents, I heard one tennis parent say, it's like we have $100 bills falling out of our pocket, whether it's shoes or strings and tournament entry fees and coaching. And it'd be nice if, I know Brandon with the FM Tennis Center, it's just in its second year, to get everybody on the same page where they're working together, where, it'd be great if the mental performance coach could be at practice and, and see the kid have a meltdown.
Well, I actually was fortunate enough to have that with a lady in Toronto, Sue Wilson, who I thought was very good. Did you ever meet Sue?
No.
She's fantastic. She's been around a long time and has worked with a lot of great athletes in different sports. But she would come on the court. It was my favorite time. We didn't do it too often, unfortunately. She's retired. But, man, that was fantastic, because exactly what you just said. It wasn't just if somebody's melting down. It was they miss a shot. And, she would jump in and say, so what are you thinking right there? Are you good? Are you ready? Do you feel like you just hit the best shot in the world, even though you hit the bottom of the net? How are you going to approach your next one? So, yeah, it's on-court training, I think, is tremendous, fantastic.
The idea with PenPal is two juniors, perhaps just like a semi-private lesson. You could just be a way to try to reduce the cost, because it has to be a relationship. It has to be long-term. It can't be like just a quick fix.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think also too, you mentioned fitness. I think the one thing with Roger Federer's parents, they hired a fitness coach for 3 years when he's like 18 years old, and he's still with him. He was with him throughout his career.
Wow, I didn't know that.
But I do think that consistency in everything. We tell the kids, all right, do 10 minutes of yoga. And I think that's where the cell phone, it was like years ago, you and I, we didn't have that problem.
Right.
We didn't. It's like a walkie-talkie. Talk to the world. I mean, the world's at your fingertips. And
believe it or not, we just had we had all these conversations this morning. Like there was another kid. I said we take a 1 hour break in the middle of our clinics, and I said to him, hey, why don't you just leave your phone here and go and just take a walk and have it, because this guy's always got his phone with him. And he says, well. Because I told him, I said, we didn't have phones. We didn't have these. He says, well, what if somebody needs to get a hold of me? I said, like who? He said, well, maybe my family. I said, your family's going to need to get a hold of you in the next hour in an emergency situation. He goes, well, you don't know. You never know. Right? And I said, you see the building over there? There's actually a phone over there. So that's what we used to do. We would give that number. We'd say, this is where I'm going to be.
And leave a message for me.
Well, or if it's an emergency, come out and get me.
Right.
But I mean, it's obviously there's lots of benefits with these phones, but I think there's more negatives, many more negatives than there are positives.
Yeah, Wayne Bryan, the dream killer.
Yeah.
Now, I've run these camps where our listeners have heard this before, but the kids sleep on the tennis court. You get an air mattress, a sleeping bag. You buy an air mattress for $10, sleeping bag for $10, and next thing you know, there's no hotel fee. It's it's very common in Europe. But when you turn the lights off, to supervise the players, the girls go to the right, boys go to the left. They have their own locker room. It's very easy to supervise the players. There's no like going to a dorm at a camp and closing the door.
Yeah.
And it's like a Christmas tree. You turn the lights of the tennis facility off, and the kids sleep with the phone in their hand. The parents, the pain and discipline and pain and regret. And I've learned so much from parents. I know you have as well. There's so many positives from parents that when the kid comes home, put the cell phone on the kitchen counter. Okay, you don't need it. Okay, you got to pick me up early. This is where I am. Waiting for the bus. That's wrong too. Kids don't take a bus in tennis. How many kids raise your hand if you've ridden a city bus. Raise your hand if you know what it means to brown bag it. Kids don't think of anything. They don't think anything of, well, we're done. We're just going to go to Chipotle.
Yeah.
We didn't make a sandwich, or we're not going to go back to the house and make a sandwich, which would cost our parents less money. Oh, we're just going to go to Chipotle. That's I think that's got to be the most popular choice among kids.
This is another topic, Steve, for sure, because I'm convinced that, and again, the players that I work with have heard me talk about this, so they probably won't want to hear it again, but about 8 or 9 years ago, I'm coaching. And you remember the old days when you were coaching a player that really wanted to be great. It was like, Coach, what? Give me some information, Coach. Give me some information, right? And boom, you tell them, they don't forget it because they want to be great. They're going to remember that. They're probably didn't have to write it down. All of a sudden, about 8 or 9 years ago, I found myself saying, remember. Okay, remember this, Steve. I'm coaching you. Steve, remember this. Okay, try not to forget this. Remember this. And I caught myself. I'm in the middle of the lesson. I'm going, what the heck's going on? Why wouldn't he remember this? But I started to realize these freaking phones are wrecking these kids' memories. They don't have to remember anything. You used to have to type it in. Now you don't have to type it in. You just go, hey, Siri, what's the wingspan of an eagle? Boom. You don't need to remember it because you can ask it again later if you forget it.
Yeah. No, I used to say to a group of kids in a van, or say a 2-minivan operation, you get 10 players, and okay, everybody bring a quote from Winston Churchill tomorrow.
Good.
And now they go boom, 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 and they have it right there. Yeah. It's not like they have to go to encyclopedia or go to the library. Yeah. It's at their fingertips. It's easy, too easy. Like today, for example, you and I, we talk about, okay, practice. I'm working with a group of 8 players, similar to what you're doing pretty much, small group. And we started off just hitting the backboard left-handed or with your opposite hand. And then I said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to play. And we, took the player who was the highest ranked player, 11-8, and he's going to play left-handed. And how are you going to do playing against him? You play right-handed, he's playing left-handed. I remember getting this from Jim Larry. It's not a joke. We're taking this serious. You're not giggling because you're playing with your opposite hand, and you're trying to have you're trying to have an efficient service motion, and it's been proven that you're actually, you can transfer myelin if you're playing with your opposite hand. So you're developing your brain to play on your dominant side, the right side, and just an experience like that. I mean, I really believe that all tennis players should play a little bit every day with their opposite hand. Go play a little mini tennis. Go hit the backboard, and then when you play a younger player, you're not belittling them, but it's like, okay, let's make this a challenge. And I found over the years that most tennis players, they play better with their opposite hand when they're playing, because when I say they're playing better, like, I think what you just said is so important. They're playing better mentally. No, the level's not better. No way. The level's not better, but they're trying to keep their ground strokes deep. They're trying to keep their ground strokes centered. And when they get that short ball, they're alert and they recognize it, and they're going to try to really close in because they don't have the skill set. And, they're not overhitting, but just, lessons like that. But I do think that with so much technology, it seems like we have less time now. Everybody's in a rush. Mm-hmm. And I do think that's a problem with tennis, is that coming back to tournaments, I love what you said, is everybody's worried about what tournaments they're going to play. And that is a beauty of the UTR, is just play. You can play in this tournament or that tournament, and, winning will take care of all your problems. You just got to beat people.
Yeah. Yeah. The tournament thing's another discussion, but going forward. But I really, truly believe that, especially Americans, I'm amazed how far they'll travel to play a tournament, right? I mean, really? I mean, you're going to get in your car and drive 8 hours? I mean, your child's probably going to lose first or second round. Well, just stay home and work on your game a little bit more. Oh, well, I need points. For what?
Really? This is all great stuff.
Right?
Your points won't get you game, but your game will get you points.
Yeah.
And
what do you need points for? Well, maybe I can get into Kalamazoo. So what? Then what? Well, how am I going to get a scholarship? Well, you call a coach. You get your coach to talk to that coach, and your coach tells them that, they can play at a certain, you have a player that can play at a certain level, and would they be interested? Oh, you mean you don't actually need a junior ranking? Not really. You don't. But most people think you do.
Oh, and they spend so much money in their early years.
Insane.
So much money. I love Kalamazoo. I've been there many, many times. They run the tournament so well. But I always tell the kids, I said, when you go to college, last year it was 62% for the men, 60% for the women. When you go to college, you ask the foreigners, they've never heard of Kalamazoo.
Yeah.
You got to the semis of Kalamazoo, and you're playing some kid from Slovenia.
I'm not worried about Kalamazoo. Kalamazoo will always be there.
Yeah.
I'm saying these things for the masses. It's crazy. Instead of invest your money in your game, and running around spending thousands on tournaments is not really, believe it or not, you're not really investing in your game. Sorry, but you're not.
But also, too, is just to find pickup matches.
Yeah.
That was much better years ago.
Yes.
In Boca Raton, where I was a perennial tennis bum in Boca Raton, they had a city tournament. They played it over 6 or 7 weeks. Everybody was in it. So in other words, if you were going to go to a wedding, say you're the best player in the tournament, best player in the city, but your brother's getting married. I got to go to a wedding. I can't play the city championships. But no, they'd have it over 7 weeks. And you had to schedule each round for the first week, the second week, the third week. So it was a true city champion. And then what they had at the end of that, they developed a ladder. They had an A ladder, B ladder. And you had to defend and challenge. You'd call people up and you'd play matches. And you'd have the youth playing the veterans. And it was so much healthier. But yeah, I do think that. And then the entry fees are quite high. But and also too is that, I think it's like my son Connor. I mean, he was ranked 2 in the U.S. in the 18s, but when his first year 16s, he couldn't get into some local tournaments because he just hadn't played enough tournaments. And I said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. And but I do think when a kid is going into their junior year in high school, it does help for them to go play tournaments. But we're talking, kids are flying all over the country and they're 12.
Yeah.
And then also too is that the kid, if they're ranked really high, they just need to know like how many players are playing in the U.S. and if there's 165 countries, and it's just here in America that there's a big difference between the international scene and the national, and you just keep going down.
Yeah.
With we always say the competition is really in the mirror. With but to get on an airplane, go here, go there, it's just.
In general, if I could sort of wrap that one up, like the tournament thing, my own comments, it's too much too soon. Players are playing too many tournaments too early in their careers. There's a time to play tournaments and there's a time to learn your skills. And the amount of time that you spend in tournaments, if you put probably half that or a third of that time into skill development, if you're double faulting twice a game, what are you doing running around the country playing tournaments? Go learn how to get your serve into play first.
Or avoiding your backhand, running the wrong way, and missing wide twice a game.
But people are told, go play tournaments, you have to go play tournaments, go. Yeah, of course. Sooner or later, that's how we measure ourselves. We measure ourselves as tennis players, as competitors in tournaments. Got to play tournaments. That's why I said Kalamazoo will always be there. There'll always be some great players playing at Kalamazoo. Okay? But everybody, there's probably so many players who could have made Kalamazoo if they would have played less tournaments when they were younger and spent more time on their skill development.
Oh, it's good skill development. I love that too much too soon. I always say people are going nowhere fast. They're running in circles.
Yeah. And it's kind of frustrating. Sometimes I just feel bad for people, So, anyway.
Well, again, knowing the stories. I always tell people if we have what we call a brain trust. Okay, here's this player, that player, and there's a group of coaches that are working with that player. I'm very much, in many ways, a supplemental coach. My former students will send me students. And I would say, well, at this point, maybe my input should just be the historical perspective. You want me to tell you some stories? Like just our last guest, Bud Schultz, never played a junior tournament and got to be 39 in the world. And, parents, listen to that.
I'll tell you it can't be done now, but it can.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't tell you how many kids I've known that, say, for example, again, coming back to number 5 years. Do you realize that you've played 5 years of tennis? You've never in those 5 years taken a second serve and come in behind it? Take it, just your opponent's serving love 40, like, okay, I'm going to play it. I'm going to attack off this return. And, it's like when it was for Roger, what was the saber? What were the initials for the saber? Short, abbreviated, I don't know, but he would come in and it was a novelty. It's like, no, this has been, people have used this tactic for years and years.
Chicken charge.
Yeah, you've played 5 years of tennis and you've never served and volley. You've played doubles for 5 years and you've played one up, one back. How are we going to offset this? Mm-hmm. And for winning that 2-inch trophy, I love the line where 64 12-year-olds play a tournament. Who wins? One 12-year-old. But are they playing, with long-term vision? Fact-based instruction for long-term division,
right.
Long-term development, long-term, you say vision as well. Is it where's this? Where's this headed? How's this story going to play out? How's this movie going to end? And it's amazing. I mean, so many kids. They may have a house full of trophies, but they've played every forehand above their shoulder. And they've got, not in a Western grip, they've got the Hawaiian grip. But yeah, we have to come back. We can talk about all these different topics.
Oh, for sure. It's been fun.
Great to have a veteran coach. Appreciate you taking time to do this.
Absolutely.
So tell us one more time your website.
CurtisTennis.com.
And we have some listeners know you have some assignments because we know you will read the articles that Coach Curtis mentioned. And he's promised we got to get him on again because he's promised he's going to sing
I'm going to go work on my singing. I promise.
little Elvis. But
Maybe we'll do a duet, Steve.
yeah, you know, I'll share. I'll
You
share.
commit to that?
Mark Hamlin, sing solo, so low no one can hear you. sing tenor, 10 or 12 miles down the road. With now, I have a musical story. When I was in the 6th grade, I could palm a basketball, and I have 3 older brothers, and they all took piano lessons, but they all quit. I never took one piano lesson, so I told my mother I would have been the best piano player in the world. No doubt, I would have been stupid and I would have quit too. But you know, with singing. You know, do I have an ear for it? But if you hear someone play a musical instrument, say they're playing a horn, it's just painful to be around. I know you can appreciate this. It's just painful to listen to someone learn to play a horn. If you're in the room, they're playing a trumpet, they're playing a trombone.
Learning.
But actually, if you really know tennis and you watch people swing at the ball poorly, it hurts. It's painful. I mean, I just see kids. I see their volley and I see their forehand. I go, oh no. And the light at the end of the tunnel is a train coming right at that kid. They have their service motion is so bad, and then you come across like you're doom and gloom and you're pessimistic. But it's like, no, this is not going to work because it's physics. Mm-hmm. It's physics.
Yep.
But no, it'd be great to have you on again, and we'll definitely get you to sing. But listeners, podcast 129, Casey Curtis, thank you very much. Listeners, thank you for listening. Adios amigos. Just wave to the camera, Casey. Good
Thanks,
man.
guys.
That was great.